somebody comes along and interrupts, all right? Well, Fred, you can come stay at my house tonight since you raised your hand. All right? No, when it comes to interruptions and how we handle interruptions in our lives, how we handle those most important moments in our lives. And, even Jesus was interrupted. Tonight, my voice is a little different because earlier in the week, Monday, as a matter of fact, I was interrupted by our puppy. Our puppy's name is Remley. She's a year old now. And you would think she would be beyond this stage, but she is a slow developer. And I got home from the gym on Monday morning, and I run into a shower and head on over to the office, and I get to the house, and Remley has chewed up my daughter Stacy. She has chewed up her wedding shoes that she wears as a bridesmaid. She's worn them at a bunch of weddings, all right? She chewed those up, and they have been in the same place. Stacy had been with us since last Thursday, and so, those shoes had been there from Thursday until Monday. Never touched them. Then when we were in Florida a few weeks ago, we went to Universal, and Stacy's a big Harry Potter fan, so we bought her one of the wands there that she could play with at home and do whatever it is you do outside the park. There's not a whole lot that you can do with it, but that piece of plastic was expensive. If you've ever been to an amusement park, there is nothing cheap in an amusement park. Somehow she got a hold of that and got it out of the box and chewed it up. And she chewed up some other things. And when I got home, it just went all through me. I know that you never have that problem, but it went completely through me. And I yelled at that dog to the point that it has messed up my voice. I yelled at her, and it wasn't that long, maybe 30 seconds or something, but it was from the diaphragm straight up. That anger just, I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And of course, she just looks at me and wags her tail, all right, because there's no way. But I didn't need that at that moment. I didn't want that. You see, that's why we call them interruptions. We don't need them at that moment. And I'm telling the dog now, I don't need you at this moment. And she just looks at me with those big brown eyes, and it's all over with. But how do you handle interruptions? The interruptions that come just in life. Well, I wish I would have handled it the way Jesus did in Luke chapter 8, beginning of verse 40. But I don't handle them that well sometimes. At least I didn't on Monday. And let's look at it together, please, tonight. It says, "Now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house, because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. 'Who touched me?' Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, 'Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you.' But Jesus said, 'Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me.' Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, 'Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace.' Now, while Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. 'Your daughter is dead,' he said. 'Don't bother the teacher anymore.' Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, 'Don't be afraid, just believe.' and she will be healed." When he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were waiting and mourning for her. "Stop wailing," Jesus said. "She is not dead, but asleep." They laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But he took her by the hand and said, "My child, get up." Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were astonished, but he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened. Luke 8:40 through verse 56. After you've had a hard day, how do you handle interruptions? I mean, for those of you that have small kids at home, and ladies, you come in and maybe it's a time when you've got a few minutes and you go in and you pour that bath and you get those bath bombs that you got from Bath and Body Works, and you get the candles out and you get the bathroom all set up like you like it, and you get in there, and soon as you dip down into that tub, you hear those knocks on the door. "Mommy, mommy, mommy, mommy." Or guys, you also have had a tough day, and you come in and you've eaten and you get over into that favorite place you like to sit, whether it's your easy chair or that corner of the couch. You have your drink, you have the remotes right there. Everything is perfect. And then suddenly, somebody breaks something, throws something, tears something up. The dog runs through with a towel, knocks over a table, everything on it goes flying across the room. How do you handle interruptions? How do you handle those interruptions that come to you? Or you're trying to fix dinner, and suddenly somebody comes to the door, and it's a college student who's trying to sell vacuum cleaners to get them through college. Then through the summer, they're out there selling and trying to get you to buy something that you really don't need. How do you treat them? How do we handle the interruptions of life? I mean, we all have to deal with them. It's not if you have interruptions in life, it's when. Because every one of us are going to face those moments when we have to do something that we did not have planned, when it comes at the absolute worst possible time, just barely enough time to get done everything on your list, and then the interruption hits. What do you do? How do you proceed? How do you move forward with that? Well, I want you to know in Luke chapter 8, Jesus did not always view interruptions as I do. Jesus didn't always look at interruptions the way that I see them. I see them as something that stops me from doing what I have planned. Yet Jesus looked at interruptions as opportunities for ministry. Jesus looked at them as opportunities for ministry. He looked at them in a way that I maybe would not. Because Jesus knew that the Father had called him. He was always in communication with God the Father and God the Holy Spirit, the three in one. They were always communicating one with another. And Jesus said that he always came to do the will of the Father. And because Jesus had that understanding inside of who he was, Jesus used interruptions not as something that maybe I would look at it and say, I don't have time. I mean, the reason that I came in a little late is a phone call came in. I had to take care of that. There was a need somewhere else, and I had to take care of that at that moment. And I knew Dana could take care of getting the service started, so I was able to do that. Yet it interrupted at a time when I really didn't want that to happen yet. Knowing what I was going to teach on tonight, and it wasn't Monday, and that was not my dog that called. I took care of the call. All right? If my dog starts using the phone, we're going to make some money. I'm just telling you with that. But Jesus used interruptions as opportunities. Jesus knew that God the Father was guiding his steps. And you know, when I go back, I've really enjoyed this study in Luke, because as I've gone back and looked, many of the key things in the Gospels that we look at, many of the key processes in the Gospels of Jesus doing miracles and working things were all caused by interruptions. Have you noticed that? I really hadn't before. I hadn't paid this close of attention to it. Jesus' first miracle at the wedding in Cana of Galilee, there was an interruption. And he turned the water into wine. There was an interruption. They had not planned well enough. They had not put everything in place where it needed to be. And because there was an interruption, Jesus used that for a moment of ministry. And then there was another time when Jesus was teaching, and a person who was demon-possessed came out and talked to him, and Jesus told them to be quiet. And Jesus cast the demon out of him. And the people were amazed at what happened. In chapter 5, he was interrupted by a group of friends who brought a paralyzed buddy in, ripped the roof off of the house because they couldn't get to Jesus. And they lowered him down. Jesus was teaching. Jesus was sharing, yet they literally ripped a hole in the roof and let their friend down there. It was another opportunity. And Jesus was able in that interruption to reveal that he had the power to forgive sin. Jesus was able to show that and express that in the midst of that interruption. And then in chapter 7, we see Jesus was at the dinner and he was reclining at the table. And the sinful woman came in and she cried and she anointed his feet. And we talked all about that in Luke chapter 7 a few weeks ago. And he had the opportunity to demonstrate grace to her. A couple weeks ago, we talked about the storm that came down the leeward side of the Sea of Galilee. And as it came in and that wind hit there, and how scared they were. An interruption to just getting across that lake that's only about 2 miles across. But when the waves are 3 to 4 feet high and the boat is not really designed to handle that kind of water, they were in trouble. Yet it was an interruption for all of the disciples, yet Jesus used it to teach them something. Later on in Luke, over in chapter 10, we find that Jesus also takes an interruption. And we'll talk about the Good Samaritan. And then later on, we're going to talk about how Jesus talks to a tax collector named Zacchaeus, who interrupts things in the procession going through town. Yet Jesus takes all of those opportunities and he uses them. He takes all of those things and he demonstrates that the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost, even in the midst of interruption. So if you and I can get to the place to where we can figure out how to take interruptions not as an inconvenience to my plan and my desire, but as a way to see God's activity in my life, it may surprise us. It may completely surprise us what God begins to walk through. And today in Luke chapter 8, we see another interruption in the life of a guy named Jairus. Jairus had a 12-year-old daughter who was sick unto death. Today there was a prayer chain that went across here at Cross Point for little baby Liam, who they had to take back to Vanderbilt University, who is connected with a family in the life of the church. And this is not what they had planned. The baby got to come home, but now there's some issues with him. And it's going to be touch and go for a long time with this little guy. But with this 12-year-old girl, she was so sick, and they'd done everything they knew. And Jairus came and fell at Jesus' feet and begged him to come to his house and heal his daughter before it was too late. Jairus begged Jesus to come and to do that. And can you imagine the passion that was in this man's voice? Can you imagine the passion that was in his life? Can you imagine the passion that, my child is hurt my child and I can't get there. I experienced that a couple days ago. Chance was riding a skateboard, and Chance is not a teenager anymore. He's in his middle to upper 20s now, old man, all right, you know. But Chance was riding a longboard on a sidewalk, and the front wheel went down in a crack. The board stopped, and he didn't. And he fell and landed on his shoulder, dislocated his shoulder. And the last time that he and Michaela had an auto accident back a couple years ago, probably 3 or 4 now. And I just happened to be there in the Lake Wells area when that happened, so I could walk through the ER. I could walk through all of those things with them. And she thanked me for being there at that time. This time I wasn't there. I'm 800 miles away. And she's got him at the hospital. And instead of calling me, she texts. I'm getting old. I get that. All right? I get that. And she tried to be just as kind in the text as she could. You know, he's okay. You know, and she wrote it in such a way where it said, he'll be all right. And, you know, all of that. And my text was, can I call him or you? And she read it to Chance, and 15 seconds later, he called me, okay? And, you know, after I heard his voice, I was much better. I knew I would get through it, and he would too at that point. Today, he went to the orthopedist. We thought it was fractured. It is not. We're very thankful for that. But, you know, just being there when that's going on, being a part of that, being in that process when that's going on. I know when they were little and there were 3 of them at the house, you know, unless you're bleeding and carrying a body part, don't come crying to me. Now, it's different. It's different now. But that was an interruption. And when we walk through those interruptions and we begin to process that way, Jesus said that he would go. And this was an urgent problem. The girl was dying. And Jairus is trying to get Jesus through that crowd. Can you imagine how maddening that must have been to Jairus? Can you imagine how frustrating that must have been to Jairus? Can you imagine how aggravating that must have been to Jairus? My daughter is sick. You all need to get out of the way. I mean, some of us say that when we drive to work every morning because we're running a little bit behind. Yet the crowd was thick. Why? Because they wanted to catch a glimpse of the miracle worker. I mean, today it would be the same thing in our community. You know, they wanted to get near him. And the Bible said that they nearly crushed him. I mean, we know what it's like when we drive by just an accident on the road. And people stretch their necks like crazy to try to see what's going on. I was coming into the office the other morning, and I was dropping down from Daniels down into Beaver, and all of a sudden the traffic stopped. And I was able to stop, but I looked in my rearview mirror, and I watched a car about 4 car lengths back. It didn't stop. And it whipped over, tried to get off the side of the road, and I watched the car in front of it jump. And I knew another fender bender on US 19. That's just the way that it works when that happens. And suddenly their whole morning also was interrupted. And so was everybody behind them. It was interrupted that day. And if that wasn't bad enough, suddenly this woman who was unclean, who should not have been allowed to be out in public for any reason whatsoever, shows up and has the nerve to touch the hem of his garment. And Jesus stops again. He stops again. And he said, "Who touched me?" And in English, it really doesn't translate as good as what it does in the Greek. Peter basically says, "You got to be kidding, Jesus." I think he was a little from Brooklyn in that particular part. All right? But he said, "You got to be kidding, Jesus. What do you mean? I mean, the crowd's pushing in on you. What do you mean, who touched you? What do you mean about this? How can you even slow us down for this? This is just a little bit crazy. But did you notice that she had been sick for 12 years? Jairus had his daughter for 12 years. And this woman had been sick for the same amount of time. And nothing could be done to help her. This was her last ditch effort. Some translations say she had spent everything she had to bring her to this point. So just as desperate as Jairus was, she was desperate. And when two desperate people come into close proximity, there is always an issue. When two desperate people come into close proximity, we don't call it that today. We say it's extra baggage. When two people with that kind of heightened emotional baggage come into close proximity, something happens. And it's typically not a very good thing. Yet this woman knew that Jesus knew something was wrong and he wasn't going to move forward. She probably had heard through the crowd that Jesus was going to heal a 12-year-old daughter, and she decided, I've got to tell him. And she told him. And in the midst of that interruption, Jesus used this opportunity for ministry to let this woman know that she was more than a minor interruption in the story. Because if you really begin to look at it, her account in there is just a sidebar to the main story. The main story is Jairus' daughter. But she is just a sidebar to that. And you know, a lot of times we hear more about her than we do Jairus' daughter. But Jesus comes along and he's dealing with that. But he said, I want you to know, even though this may be a sidebar in the story, young woman, I want you to know you matter. And that what happens to you is important to God. Now, Jesus was slowed down again. Put yourself in Jairus' position. Where would you be? How would you feel? I mean, you are at a point of, come on. The Bible doesn't tell us his emotional state. The Bible doesn't tell us how Jairus was at that moment. But I can imagine he's like, my daughter is about to die. Come on. I mean, this is bad, Jesus. Come on. That woman has bled for 12 years. You can come back and find her. My daughter is about to die. What will we do with this? My daughter is serious. What are you going to do, Jesus, about that? And to add more to it, the worst possible news could happen at this moment. Somebody comes and says, don't bother Jesus anymore. She's gone. And Jairus, I'm sure at that moment, had a meltdown. I'm sure Jairus at that moment was someone who was absolutely destroyed by that, because he was trying everything in his power to get Jesus where he felt Jesus absolutely needed to be. And these interruptions, no matter how noble using it as opportunities for ministry may be, his girl now was beyond help. And this is where Jesus steps in again. In a moment of interruption, and says, hold on. Hold on. It's not as bad as you think. Come on, Jairus. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. And Jesus moved then. The Bible doesn't tell us of any other interruptions after this, until Jesus gets to the house and the people are there and they are wailing and they are crying and they are dealing with the death of a child. And I can tell you, in all the years that I've been privileged to be the pastor of this congregation, the worst crying I've ever heard in my life is when parents lose a child. There is something that is just extremely difficult. And I have had to be there at moments like that. And I'm sure that was the type of issue that Jesus, again, walked into. And when he went in there, the people were crying because they knew she was gone. And Jesus said, "Nah, she'll be okay. She's just asleep." And they laughed at him. They laughed at Jesus because they knew when someone passed away. It wasn't some go into a deep coma and all the stuff that you hear people talking about. They knew whether you were alive or not. They understood it. They recognized it. And because they knew what was going on, Jesus kept them out except for his inner circle and the mother and the father. And Jesus, the man who had been interrupted over and over and over again, walks into that room and he says, "Get up. Get up." And at that moment, her spirit came back into her. And all of the interruptions, all of the struggles, all of the things that happened, the response of her parents, it says they were astonished. They were amazed. They were wowed. Their socks were blown off. They were overwhelmed. Because whenever Jesus faced an interruption, and as you read through the Bible, when you're doing your Bible reading at home going forward, notice all of those times in Scripture that we talk about and we celebrate, like the crossing of the Red Sea and all of the things that happened to the children of Israel and to the early church. If you'll look, almost without exception, every one of them were moments of interruption. Almost all of them were moments when things did not go as planned. Almost always they were things that when you really began to look at it, you question why it happened. So if Jesus lived in a world of interruption, why are we so surprised when interruptions hit us? If Jesus' ministry almost was built on moments of interruption, how is it that we are surprised, frustrated, annoyed, flabbergasted, angered, scared, traumatized by moments of interruption? Because ultimately, we've got to understand that we've got to learn how we are going to be coping with our interruptions, because our lives are going to be interrupted. Our lives are going to have that. I mean, just what is it about interruptions that make them so distasteful to us? What is it that makes them so maddening to us when they come along and they hit us? I mean, I think it all boils down to I'm doing my own thing, and I really want to do my own thing, and I want to plan it out the way that I want to plan it out, and it's my own agenda. Instead of living my life saying, "God, you set the agenda, I'll walk with you. God, you set the agenda. You're the one that I walk with. You're the one that I'm dependent on. I don't want a life of independence from you. I want a life of dependence with you. And when I have a life of dependence with you, then I'm able to do that." You know, if we will only share and minister when it's on our schedule, we will miss many of the opportunities that God has for us. If we only want to do it on our schedule and on our time. I mean, we all approve of the idea of witnessing, but we don't want to do it when it's not convenient for us. We all believe that we should witness and share, Christ with people, but, we don't want to do it when the big game's on. We don't want to do it when I'm getting ready and packing the family to take them on vacation. We don't want to do it when it's just not really a good time for me. You see, the problem with an attitude like that is it really doesn't work. And the interruption gets bigger and it gets worse. And I'm not willing to deal with the needs of that moment. We've got many people in the life of the church that you have vocations where you have to deal with interruptions and what's going on in the lives of people and the struggles that are there. But we still like our own agenda. We still like our own plans. We still like that. So to turn interruptions into opportunities, there's some things that we can learn here this evening. The first one is I have to surrender my agenda to God's will. I have to surrender my schedule to God's will. And there were times when Jesus healed people on the Sabbath. And the teachers of the law wanted him to tell them to come back when the Sabbath was over, because it didn't fit their schedule. Jesus wasn't supposed to do that on the Sabbath. I know of someone in the eastern United States who works at a particular place, and they had an emergency that came in, and it's a medical facility. And the emergency came in, and this person really was threatening to do harm to themselves. But because it was near their quitting time, they called them back and said, come back on Monday. I'm getting ready to go home. And that person left. I don't know what happened to the other person. I don't know what happened to the person who was struggling with that. But you see, when my agenda becomes more important than God's agenda, I will miss those opportunities. When my agenda becomes more important than God's will in my life, I will miss those opportunities. But if I want to see those interruptions as moments that God can use, I will surrender my agenda to God's will. Second thing that we find is that I have to place the needs of others above my wants. And of course, one major factor in being able to turn interruptions into opportunities is not thinking of the interruption or the person causing the interruption as an afterthought, but realizing that they are someone that God created, that God loved them. And when I can do that, then I can place their needs above my wants. I can place their needs above my frustrations. I can place their needs above the things that are working so hard inside of me. You see, if I want to make sure that I don't miss those opportunities, I have to remember to see my life's purpose as ministry. And that's not just for people who stand on a platform. That's every child of God. We have to see our lives as purposes to do ministry. That God calls all of us to be a part of what He is doing in and around our world. God uses that for us. This is part of who we are. We've got people every day who deal with people where you work. That you do ministry every day. We've got medical professionals. We've got educational professionals. We've got trades professionals in the life of this church that do ministry every day. They'll do ministry on top of a roof. They'll do ministry underground. They'll do ministry inside of a building. They'll do ministry outside. Wherever they are, they find a way to do ministry because they understand, like Jesus did, that our life is about ministry. It's about caring for those around us. And I'll get a call sometimes say, I know that you're busy and I don't want to interrupt you. And I'm like, I've got time for you. What's going on? I've got time for you. What's going on? And it's in those moments when we step back just a little while and say, I've got time for you. What's going on? But you see, every person, if we have the ability to do this, then we also have to have the availability to do it. We have to have the availability to be ready. I know some very, 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 very talented people who have the ability to do some great things. But God has to do it according to their schedule, or it won't get done. And then God uses somebody who may have half the ability, but they have availability. And God takes them and does amazing things in their lives. And the person sometimes with ability says, well, why didn't God use me? And a few times I've had to say, because you weren't available. Because you weren't willing. Some of them live in this area. Some of them live all across the United States. But it's because you weren't willing to be available. You weren't willing to step outside your agenda, your schedule, the way that you wanted to do it. You would not do that. And so when we can't say, when a need comes forward, here am I, send me, we'll miss the invitation of God. We'll miss the invitation of God. When the opportunity came for us to start a satellite congregation in Barbersville, somebody asked me, why Cross Point? You're not close. Shouldn't it be a congregation that's closer? And I'm like, I don't know. God gave us the opportunity, and this congregation said yes. This elder board said yes. This pastoral staff said yes. Are there people with greater ability out there? Absolutely there are. But we said yes. And so if we're going to turn interruption into ministry, availability has to be a part of that. And understand that's our life's purpose. It's to do ministry. Last Sunday, Dad and Mom had an invitation to share over at the Nazarene Church over on Johnstown Road here in Beckley to help Matt's brother Michael, when Michael had an opportunity to go and be a part of a church where he'd served before, and to love on those folks again. And they said yes. And so Cross Point was doing ministry over there on Sunday as well. You see, it's those availability moments when we say, Lord, I don't know what you can do with me, but here I am. I don't know what you can do with me, but here it is. So I have to make myself available to God. If I'm going to let the interruptions become opportunities, I have to make myself available to God. And why does God send interruptions our way? Sometimes He sends them as an opportunity for us to minister one another. And sometimes He sends them as a way of ministering to us. Sometimes He has to get us out of our rut. The problem with our rut is we like our rut. We really do. I mean, we have our patterns, and we have our habits, and we have many of those things. You know, we start seeing life just one way and living this particular way and acting this particular way and striving to go our way. And here's the other thing. Ruts can get deep. Have you noticed that? I mean, ruts can get really, really deep to where they get so deep, sometimes you can't even look outside of them. All you can see is inside where it really is. And God sends along an interruption. And He unruts us. Okay? I don't know if that's a word or not, but it ought to be. He gets to the place to where He moves us out of our rut. And he says, let me show you what I want to do now. And it's at that moment we have the choice to make. Will I use the interruption as an opportunity for growth, an opportunity for ministry, an opportunity to serve God, an opportunity to praise God in the middle of the interruption? The choice is ours. Justin, would you come, please?
As we close our time this